Today, I am walking you through a drawing exercise that's all about gestural movement, and I'll talk more about that later, but get your supplies ready and let's get started. The first thing I did was go through and find some landscape pictures that I was interested in. So I opted for some rock formations, and I will talk more about that in a moment. But the first thing that I would recommend doing is finding some reference pictures online. And if you were creating artwork that you were going to enter in a contest or that you were going to sell, you would want to take your own picture. But since this is just for practice, it is okay to work with photos from the internet. So first thing I'm starting with, this line here, is my horizon line. So that's the line that's dividing the ground or the water from the sky. And this portion that I'm working on now, I am blocking out the basic composition of my drawing. And composition, when you're talking about artwork, is the elements on the page that are moving your eye around. So an interesting composition gets your eye to focus on one area first and then look around the whole space. And I got some help with my composition because I'm using a photographer's work. So that again is why I recommend for practice to find some photography that you find interesting. And that means that you already have a good composition to work from. After I blocked out the composition, what you see me working on now is adding in some texture. So one of the main focuses of this drawing exercise, and here you can see my little example picture again, is to focus on texture. So I am looking at the lines that the rocks are creating and trying to mimic that texture in my drawing. I am not worried so much about creating an exact replica of my reference photo. What I'm more concerned with is creating an interesting texture for my eyes to look at and to help move the viewer's composition. So whether it's you or someone else, whoever's looking at this artwork, you want their eyes to move around what you've drawn because you have such a variance of lines, and some are close together, some are far apart, some are jagged, some are smooth. Whatever the texture is that you're trying to create, that is the interesting part of this drawing exercise. And I said I would come back to it. The reason I chose to draw a rock formation for my landscape is because the way that your eyes perceive the lines that make up most rock formations is more simplistic than a lot of other textures that you find in nature. So that's not to say that you couldn't choose any sort of picture of something outside, but a rock formation is, in my opinion, something that's simple and not so intimidating to start with. Now you can see I've moved into the next step of this drawing process, and that is going to be choosing your secondary drawing utensil. Remember that this is all about gestural expressive lines, so choose a utensil that is going to lend itself to not blending out. So if you do choose to use a pencil for the whole drawing, that could work, but do not smudge out your lines because you are trying to make these gestural lines. You are trying to preserve the texture that your hand created when it was drawing. Some other materials that you could use are colored pencil, marker. I'm using a ballpoint pen, so just a regular office pen. Anything you have at home, you could make work for this. I would recommend, however, using a dark color if you can. So if not black, then maybe dark blue, purple, green, something along those lines. Now, the reason for this is we are following this texture map that we've created with pencil. And now what we're focusing on, while we're emphasizing the texture, which is already created for us with the pencil map, what we're focusing on now is creating different values with the singular colored utensil that you've chosen to use. Now, I'm using a pen, one color, a black pen, and I'm achieving light, medium, and dark values depending on the space that I'm leaving between the lines of the pen. So here you can see better. The white areas are created by leaving the white of the paper. The gray areas, the medium tones, are created by leaving a good amount of space between the lines of the pen, and the really dark black areas are created by leaving almost no space between the lines when I'm coloring with the pen. So, as a little recap, what we're focusing on for this drawing exercise. First, creating our composition, pretty minimal step. You're just laying things out. Then you're really focusing on the texture in your reference image. It doesn't need to look exact, but you're drawing inspiration from the textures you see and mapping that out with pencil first. Then what I'm doing now with your secondary utensil, mine is a pen, you are emphasizing the texture that is mapped out for you. And while you're doing that, creating some variance in the way that your lines are spaced, and your brain, when it's looking at all this information together, reads texture and it reads value because you are leaving different amounts of space between your lines. I hope that makes sense. If not, please let me know and I will clarify in this week's answer video. What I have moved on to now is an area in my drawing that has a different texture. This part of the drawing at the bottom here, in the photo, it was water. So I don't necessarily care that your brain reads these lines as being water, but I do care that it looks like a different texture than the rocks. So I'm making a very conscious effort to make the lines that I'm making with the pen in these areas smoother than the lines that I was making for the rock area. Again, all about texture, all about value. And now all my texture is pretty much laid out. I was happy with it at this point. What I'm doing is looking back and seeing where I could add some more areas of dark value. And here you can see I am making very evenly spaced lines, and I'm letting the texture underneath show through. And because you can see the texture underneath, these lines are going to read as shadows. This technique of the evenly spaced lines is actually called hatching. And if you go in the opposite direction, that is called cross hatching. So that is another thing to try out during this drawing exercise. And remember, this is an exercise, so that means this is for practice. If in the end you get a picture that does not look like your real life photo, so it looks like something that's made up, that is okay. There is nothing wrong with abstraction, which means you made something that looks not like real life. This is just for practice, so have some fun with it, focus on the things that I've outlined, and show me your results. That's all I'm interested in. Good luck, y'all.